Epstein. Bill Clinton allegedly took a total of 4 trips on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, known by the media as the Lolita Express, although flight records published by Gawker in 2015 suggested he took more than a dozen, and unverified records reported by Fox News claim he flew with Epstein at least 26 times. Clinton has also been pictured receiving a massage from one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers. However, she has been quoted as saying, although the image looks bizarre, President Clinton was a perfect gentleman during the trip. Jeffrey Epstein was famously known for having this painting of Clinton by Australian artist Patrina Ryan Clyde hanging in his house. Clinton, who's been accused of sexual misconduct multiple times and actually compensated one of his accusers to the tune of $850,000, claims to know nothing about Epstein's terrible crimes and denies
about is Clinton and Gates. If you want to kind of get into that part, I'll read one story to you and then you take it from there. Bill Clinton's aide linked to Jeffrey Epstein killed himself with
Mark
a shotgun despite no gun. I mean, I got to tell you, I've spent a lot of time, I've seen Copperfield, what's his name?
David Copperfield.
David Copperfield
David
and
Blaine.
some magicians, these guys, they're great. But the ability for the Clintons to do magic like this, I don't think they give them enough credit for how great they are in doing magic, right? Mark Middleton, a former advisor to President Clinton, was found dead in May 2022 in Heifer Ranch in Perryville, Arkansas. He was discovered hanging from a tree with a gunshot wound in his chest, despite no evidence of the weapon that killed him. Middleton had ties to convicted child trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, repeatedly signing him into the White House during his tenure as Clinton's special advisor. The investigation into Middleton's death by Perry County Sheriff's Office raises more questions than answers. Middleton's body and car were found at Heifer's Ranch, which is owned by non-government organization allegedly connected to the Gates Foundation and Clinton Foundation. The release of the investigation report was delayed due to Middleton's family's concerns about the publication of harmful, substantiated and hateful articles on the internet. The judge allowed the dissemination of certain details, but prohibited the release of images. Middleton had a controversial history, including being implicated in exploiting his access to impress business clients while working at the White House in the 90s. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you kill yourself with a shotgun and hang yourself at the same time?
Mark Middleton, again, this is another reason why I don't think mainstream media lets anyone talk about the Clinton-Epstein relationship before the year 2000 or until Clinton left office. Mark Middleton was a central figure in some very significant Clinton-era scandals. It was not just him abusing his access to the White House after he left. I'll give you an example. Congress was investigating Mark Middleton at the time 9/11 happened. And, of course, 9/11 happens, they move on to other stuff, obviously. But before then, the Bush administration, George W. Bush's first time invoking executive privilege was to block the release of documents to Congress about 3 different things. One of those was Mark Middleton. Why is Bush stepping in to protect a Clinton aide? That should tell you that there's something bigger there with Mark Middleton. And then if you look at when Mark Middleton was called to testify as part of these investigations, he pleaded the Fifth 28 times, including to the question, are you a foreign agent?
Wow.
So there's obviously a deeper story here. The question is, why wasn't Mark Middleton, suicided, whatever you want to call it, back then? Why did it happen so recently? I would argue it's because in 2019, when the Epstein case broke, it was alleged by the Daily Beast that Epstein had only had 5 meetings with Mark Middleton. And then you find out from Daily Mail gets White House visitor logs a couple of months, maybe like 4 months before Mark Middleton's found dead. It was around 15. It was much higher. Something was going on. And then if, of course, you go and look at what was Mark Middleton involved in at the time he was meeting with Epstein and what was Epstein doing, it starts to get really weird. Epstein, at the time he was meeting with Mark Middleton on behalf of Leslie Wexner, was involved in negotiating the relocation of Southern Air Transport from Miami, Florida to Columbus, Ohio, where it would ostensibly be mainly running cargo for Wexner's company, The Limited. Have you ever heard of Southern Air Transport? Southern Air Transport used to be Air America. It was the CIA's proprietary airline.
And Wexner bought it. He bought the bunch of the planes.
He didn't buy it, but he basically pulling levers, got a very attractive incentive package developed by the government of Ohio, taxpayers on the hook, to relocate Southern Air Transport.
Right.
Promises of bringing all these jobs, which never materialize, and basically Southern Air Transport gets pumped and dumped and goes bankrupt a few years after this move by the end of the 90s. But anyway, it was being, in the 1980s, it was the main airline for Iran-Contra. Arms and weapons dealing, and then gets involved with some weird stuff going on with the first Gulf War. And with that history, that is the specific airline sought out by Epstein and Wexner. They could have gone for any other airline in the U.S. There's a lot. They first tried one called Aero Air, also tied to Iran-Contra, and also the BCCI scandal. Then they go to this Polar Air Cargo, which is a joint partnership of 3 companies, one of which is Southern Air Transport. The other 2 guys kick out Southern Air Transport. The Limited dumps Polar Air Cargo and goes straight to Southern Air Transport. They seem to be very desperate for one of these shady airlines. And Southern Air Transport previously, like I said, was in Miami, Florida. And during Iran-Contra, of course, it was going to Latin America, Mena, Arkansas, or Clinton's governor. All this weird stuff's going on. Yeah. And it goes to Columbus. It starts going from Columbus to Hong Kong. That's the circuit it's going. What is Mark Middleton doing during this period? Mark Middleton is a central figure in a largely forgotten Clinton-era scandal called ChinaGate that intimately involves a bunch of very weird business ties between Southeast Asian conglomerates, mainly the Lippo Group, which had gone into business with the Chinese government by this time. And a bunch of very, very weird stuff happens. I don't know how deep you guys want to go into that scandal because it's very convoluted, very extreme. But basically, I would say sort of ChinaGate in a sense is a misnomer because what is really going on here is that this is the Riady family and Jackson Stevens. So
I do want you to talk on the Riady family.
Okay.
If you can touch on that.
Yeah, sure. So the Riadis are I guess ethnically Chinese, but they've been in Indonesia for a very long time. They're one of the main oligarchs in that country. Their main business interest for a long time has been based around the Lippo Group, which has a bazillion subsidiaries all over the world, mainly concentrated in Southeast Asia, but also, of course, a U.S. subsidiary as well, which was run by this guy named Johnny Huang, who at the time of ChinaGate, who was a major guy in the ChinaGate scandal. And sometime in the early 80s, the Riadis, got involved in Little Rock, Arkansas, and forged an early partnership with Jackson Stevens, who's one of these Arkansas businessmen, political kingmakers. He's largely seen as being responsible for Clinton's political career from Arkansas onward. But he also, for example, financed the campaign of George Bush Sr., sort of playing both sides. And a lot of his companies that he ran, Stevens Inc., Beverly Enterprises, Systematics, have either been tied to major Clinton corruption scandals of the past or to Iran-Contra, specifically in the case of Systematics. So the Riady family and Jackson Stevens had these intertwined business dealings and basically, become sort of this hub of political cronyism in Arkansas. And then, of course, Clinton gets into the presidential office and it, is much more expansive than that at that point, meaning beyond Arkansas, obviously. So basically what was going on with ChinaGate, I guess you could say, is that a bunch of money from foreign nationals, mainly Chinese nationals, a lot of them with ties to the Chinese government or the Chinese military, are being funneled through a series of individuals who can donate to the DNC, or the DNC is directly taking money from people that are foreign nationals who, of course, can't legally contribute to campaigns. And so, that was the focus of the congressional investigation, that it was like illegal fundraising. But what was that money buying these people? It was almost all focused on the Commerce Department. The head of the Commerce Department at this time is Ron Brown, who, of course, dies under very suspicious circumstances near the end of this, when it starts to come out in the 90s, I think 96 or so. Dies in a plane crash, but he has a bullet wound in his head. And all the other,
maybe somebody was shooting
crash.
in a forest and that bullet went
well,
into the plane.
here's the thing. The part of the Commerce Department that was most targeted by ChinaGate, the ITA, all the other people on the plane with him pretty much were ITA, except for Johnny Huang wasn't on the plane because he'd been let go by that point. But right before Ron Brown gets on that plane to Croatia, he agreed to investigate or cooperate with independent counsel probes into this stuff. And he was unexpectedly asked to go on a trade mission to Croatia. And then the plane crashes, allegedly blamed on a 1930s era navigation system at the airport in Croatia. But a few days after the crash, the head of the navigation at that Croatian airport is found dead with a shotgun wound to the chest, and it's ruled a suicide. So there's some weird stuff going on with ChinaGate, to say the very least. But again, I think it's really more of a misnomer. There's a lot deeper corruption here. And I talk about it pretty extensively in my book, going through the congressional, the Senate reports, and all of that. And some of the main things that seem to be going on there, it was about getting the Commerce Department and the Clinton administration to push for most favored nation trading status with China, and to there was a certain point where in exchange for that, Clinton had banned the import of Chinese weapons to the United States as sort of the caveat for giving China MFN status. And before then, the biggest market for Chinese weapons was the United States. So they're smuggling weapons into the U.S., and they get caught doing that on some Chinese state-owned barges coming to the West Coast. But then you have to wonder, well, what was going on with Southern Air Transport? Going from Hong Kong to Columbus. And if you think about, I think we talked about this last time, Epstein had these weird associations with arms deals in Iran-Contra, was mentored by an arms dealer named Douglas Leese, who had, all sorts of connections to the defense industry, both in Britain and the U.S. He's a British guy, though. And that's the guy that connected him with Stephen Hoffenberg of Towers Financial and the Ponzi scheme that was ran there, and Epstein's name was dropped from the case. Hoffenberg took the hit, and instead of Epstein going to prison, he starts hanging out with Robert Rubin at the White House, who's a former head of Goldman Sachs. There's a crazy, I don't know. I mean, there's so much we could get into with the whole Clinton-Epstein thing in the 90s. Again, this is why I say they only talk about Clinton and Epstein after Clinton left office, because they don't want you looking at all this crazy stuff.
Question for you. So what frustrates me and almost infuriates me is when you're selling out America, okay? And, when you make it to the top. The question for me would be the other way. Which one of our presidents have we had that hasn't sold America to somebody else for their own personal benefit? I'm being very serious with you.
No, I know. Well, let me
Who hasn't sold America?
Let me go back to ChinaGate for a second, because there's a Biden connection. So basically, one of the other guys that was targeting the Clinton Commerce Department was this guy named Bernard Schwartz, who was a major military contractor. Laurel was his company. He later sold a bunch of it off to Lockheed Martin, because the head of Lockheed Martin at that time was his really good friend, Norm Augustine. And Norm Augustine goes on a few years later to make In-Q-Tel for the CIA. But Bernard Schwartz basically was trying to he was the biggest donor to Clinton, legal donor to the Clinton campaign in 96, where all this ChinaGate stuff was happening. And he was specifically trying to get satellite export controls moved from the State Department to the Commerce Department, so Ron Brown would handle it. And Ron Brown, he'd basically given a bunch of, Ron Brown had been DNC chairman before this and had been involved in a lot of this funny stuff going on.
The guy who got shot in the head was a former DNC chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he was Commerce Secretary. So Bernard Schwartz was basically trying to do technology transfers to the Chinese military. I don't really know why, but he was very, if you look at the documentation of what Laurel was doing, who it was selling it to, and the broader ChinaGate stuff, and again, this is coming from the congressional report. I'm not even relying on mainstream media here. This is the U.S. government investigation. Bernard Schwartz has a lot to answer for, but again, because 9/11 happens, everyone forgets about this stuff, right? Because it's that was the last administration. We have a lot of bigger stuff to deal with now, right? So Bernard Schwartz, it turns out, was one of the top, if not the main donor to Biden's primary campaign in 2020.
Bernard Schwartz was.
Bernard Schwartz.
And he was the single largest contributor to the Democratic Party, 92 through 96. In 1998, for his 71st birthday party, he celebrated his birthday, I think, at the White House with the Clintons.
Probably. That would sound about right. Yeah, very close. But this is a guy that was selling our most sensitive military satellite technology to the PLA.
So, to me, who hasn't sold America? And what happens to those guys? Okay, if you were to go back and you were to say, these are the people at the top that didn't sell out. Have you investigated that? Because to me, that's just as important as who has sold out?
Yeah, so, I mean, you come across, I mean, frankly, you know, looking at someone like Ron Brown, he was corrupt, but he was going to, you know, work with the investigators, and he gets killed off. What kind of message does that send to other people at the ITA and the Commerce Department that we're going to testify to Congress? You want to end up like Ron Brown?
So you're saying that behind closed doors, those types of talks are happening where...
I think it's very possible. Most definitely. Yeah. I mean, to think it wouldn't, I don't know. Again, it's hard to say because I don't know. I'm not there. I don't have access to those documents, but I think it's pretty clear. You look at something like the FBI, for example, more recently, there is apparently an FBI document that has been requested by Congress that shows Biden engaging in play-to-play politics with a foreign national. The FBI won't release it. Isn't the FBI, you know, no one's above the law, all this stuff, everyone's supposed to be on the same playing field. Oh, you know, if that type of corruption really was happening in the U.S., the FBI would investigate it for sure.
Why don't they?
Well, I think you just kind of have to go back and look at the history of the FBI. You know, a lot of these people like J. Edgar Hoover and people like that have sort of been given this mythical, legendary status. They're paragons of morality, you know, all this stuff. But if you look back at like Hoover, for example, an insane amount of mob associations or mob-linked businessmen. He was obsessed with blackmail, acquiring it on friend and foe. He was involved in power struggles with the early intelligence services about who was going to have more control over America. According to a case that was won by Martin Luther King Jr.'s family in the late 90s, Hoover's FBI was responsible for killing Martin Luther King Jr.
Killing?
Hoover's
No, okay.
FBI linked